Here at Peryle Keye Real Estate, we have put together a mini video series to share with buyers and sellers in the marketplace some important changes that are coming to the real estate industry effective December 1st, 2023. The real estate industry has been long governed by a legislation known as REBBA 2002. That stands for Real Estate and Business Brokers Act 2002. Recently, this legislation is going through reform, and some of the most important changes are coming into effect on December 1st, 2023, and the legislation will now be known as TRESA 2002, which stands for Trust in the Real Estate Services Act. One of the most important changes that is coming into this legislation is that under REBBA, buyers and sellers had the opportunity to select whether they would like to be a client or a customer when it came to a real estate transaction. Under TRESA, however, they are going to completely eliminate the customer option. And instead, under TRESA, effective December 1st, buyers and sellers can choose to either be a client or a self-represented party. First, let's begin by understanding the distinction between a client versus a self-represented party. For years now, buyers and sellers have been presented with a one-page document known as Working with a Realtor, where they were presented the opportunity to choose if they wanted to be a client versus a customer and what would happen should multiple representation occur. And don't worry, we have an entire section dedicated to some important changes coming to multiple representation as well. Under TRESA, the reformed legislation, this one-page Working with a Realtor document will be completely eliminated and replaced with what will be known as the RICO Information Guide. The guide is designed to provide to buyers and sellers an overview of what it looks like to be a client versus a self-represented party, including the risks and the benefits, important changes coming to multiple representation, key items within an agreement that you would sign as either a buyer or a seller, and more. At the end of this document, which will be approximately 12 pages, there will be an acknowledgement section where buyers and sellers will be asked to sign that they have received the document and that it has been explained to them by their realtor prior to entering into an agreement. So what is the main distinction between a client and a self-represented party? Part of the reason of eliminating a customer experience under REBBA and introducing a self-represented option under TRESA is to create a clearer distinction about the services that buyers and sellers choose before entering into a real estate agreement. As a client, you are owed the highest and best relationship that you can have with a realtor and a brokerage. You are owed facts, confidentiality, advice, guidance, disclosures, loyalty, the list goes on. Whereas a self-represented party, you are choosing to be very much on your own, doing your own due diligence into sales and comparables, doing your own due diligence into the property in question, including zoning and permits and a host of other things that comes with a purchase. And on top of that, self-represented parties will be choosing to draft their own documents. That is a huge distinction that we have not seen before. So much so that the guide that is being introduced encourages people who want to be self-represented to first seek independent professional advice before proceeding with that option. Now let's talk about multiple representation, always a hot topic in the real estate industry. Under REBBA 2002, multiple representation was permitted, and it will continue to be permitted in the province of Ontario under TRESA effective December 1st, 2023, except there are a few improvements and changes happening in that area. Under REBBA, multiple representation was permitted with disclosure and consent, and it had multiple scenarios where it could occur. For example, multiple representation would occur if a seller, client, or customer, or a buyer, client, or customer were being represented by two separate realtors, two separate humans under the same brokerage. That is multiple representation. It's still considered consent and disclosure. Multiple representation can also occur where we have a buyer and a seller being represented by the same realtor, one human, under that brokerage. And multiple representation can also occur when you have one realtor representing two separate buyers pursuing the same property. Those are just a couple or a few examples. Now, under TRESA, multiple representation will still require consent and disclosure, but much earlier in the process. And it will also fall under two designated categories so that buyers and sellers can be much more informed and clear about what type of representation is occurring. Under brokerage representation, which is category 1, buyers and sellers will understand that while they are working with separate realtors, multiple representation is occurring because it is happening under the same brokerage. Category 2 is designated representation, which means that the seller and the buyer understand that although they're working under a brokerage, they have a designated realtor representing them. And in this particular scenario, that designated realtor might be representing the buyer and the seller. Understand that as a buyer and a seller, you have options, and these will be much clearer under TRESA. For example, a buyer or a seller, let's take that as an example, could request that the brokerage find another designated representative, another realtor, under the brokerage to represent the buyer in the transaction. Another example would be that a seller asks the brokerage to refer the buyer out to a completely different brokerage. Understand that if multiple representation occurs post December 1st, 2023, as a buyer or a seller, this will be disclosed to you. You will have to consent in writing, and if you don't feel comfortable, you will have options. Here at our brokerage, our motto is we want clients for life, not for one transaction. So more important than trying to double end our own listing is that everyone who comes to the table feels 1000% comfortable with the process. And as previously mentioned, all of this information, including the important distinction between a client versus a self-represented party, will be made available to buyers and sellers alike through the information guide prior to making any decisions. Moving on, let's talk about multiple offer scenarios and the offer process, because there are some key changes that TRESA is introducing effective December 1st, 2023. Let's first take a step back and understand what was permitted under REBBA. Under REBBA, buyers were entitled to know the total number of offers that were being submitted on a property. For example, if I was representing a buyer and we were told 9 other offers were on the table, we would be informed that a total of 10 offers had been submitted or were being submitted on the property in question. However, we would not be permitted to know the contents of any of those offers. Under TRESA, that will change because sellers and buyers will have a variety of options available to them. Let's talk about sellers first. Under TRESA, sellers can opt for either a blind bidding process or an open bidding process, and they can also change at any time. Under TRESA, sellers will be able to opt for a blind bidding process or an open bidding process, and they can also change their mind at any time, which means that sellers will be permitted to share as little or as many contents about offers on the table with other competing offers on the table as well. Understand that your personal information and any personal identifying information would not be a part of that disclosure. Now, as a buyer, that can certainly feel damaging. Perhaps you do not want the other parties at the table to know the top dollar you are willing to pay for a home, or the closing date, or the conditions that you may or may not have in your offer. Understand that as a buyer, TRESA is giving you the option to decide whether you would like to participate in an open bid process where the seller would share contents of your offer to other parties. And there are options available to you, such as asking your realtor to draft a clause where if any or all or very specific contents of your offer, such as your offering price or your closing date, are disclosed to any other parties or offers on the table in that process, and then your offer is ultimately picked, you can null and void your offer. It is going to be imperative that under this new reform legislation, buyers and sellers are fully educated with their options and the risks and the benefits associated with each prior to engaging in the multiple offer or offer process on a listing. Also under TRESA, another important change to note is that under REBBA, when buyers and sellers opted into an agreement as a client, their agreement was with the brokerage. Even though they were interacting with a realtor or a human, the relationship and the contract was signed with the brokerage. However, under TRESA, there will now be an additional option for buyers and sellers not just to elect to work with a brokerage, but also designate which realtor at that brokerage they would like to be representing them in the transaction. December 1st, 2023 is the date. TRESA will be the reform legislation that guides the real estate industry in Ontario. Remember that as a buyer or seller, be sure to be in receipt of that RICO information guide prior to making any decisions about being a client or a self-represented party. As a client, you are owed the highest and best relationship you could have with a brokerage or a realtor. You are owed facts, confidentiality, advice, guidance, loyalty, disclosure, and more. If you elect to be a self-represented party, remember the guide is recommending that you seek independent professional advice prior to electing that as well. Here at Peryle Keye Real Estate, we're here to help you with your real estate needs, answer any questions that you may have, and what's most important to us is that you are completely comfortable throughout the entire real estate transaction.